Leipzig, Germany, November 1923. Two neighbors live in the same building. The first is a world-class concert pianist, 15 years of grueling training, a celebrated debut at the Gewandhaus, and recordings sold across every capital in Europe. The second is a plumber who learned his trade at 16 from an uncle who barely finished elementary school. Fast forward to today, the pianist is on a street corner, begging for a crust of bread. The plumber is sitting down to a full, warm dinner. Most people see this as a simple story of blue-collar versus white-collar work. It is knee. We've been fed a specific dogma for decades. Get the degree, collect the credentials, climb high enough, and you'll be untouchable. We were promised that the higher your education, the safer your floor. But 7 decades of economic autopsies, forensic deep dives into market failures, reveal a brutal alternative. Every systemic collapse in recorded history has inverted that hierarchy. We've seen surgeons driving taxis, engineers washing cars, and PhDs trading rare books for a sack of rotting potatoes. But there's one part they never tell you. Buried in the labor market data from Weimar Germany to modern-day Venezuela, a specific set of skills consistently survives, and one of them isn't even a trade. Picture a mechanic's garage in Buenos Aires, December 2001. Argentina has just defaulted on $93 billion in sovereign debt, the largest state bankruptcy in history at the time. Banks are frozen, ATMs are empty, the peso is about to decouple from the dollar and lose 60% of its value overnight. Middle-class families are in the streets, banging pots in desperation, but the mechanic in his pit never stops working. His name isn't important. What matters is his income. Before the crisis, he charged 50 pesos per hour. After the devaluation, he still charged 50 pesos per hour. In nominal terms, the number was the same, but in dollar terms, his labor became dirt cheap and demand exploded. Argentines who used to trade in their cars every 3 years suddenly realized that their current car had to last another decade. A mechanic who could keep a 1995 Renault running for another 100,000 miles was no longer just a laborer. He was essential infrastructure. This is the first law of collapse economics. When people can no longer afford to replace things, the person who can repair them becomes a critical node in the survival economy. NBER working papers on the Argentine crisis confirm this. While finance and retail collapsed, skilled trades, electricians, plumbers, and welders held firm. In the informal economy, their real wages actually increased because the supply of skilled labor shrank faster than the demand for it. In 2002, Argentina's repair sector processed 30% more vehicles than in the prosperous year of 2000. We see this forensic signature everywhere. In Weimar Germany, 1923, as the mark fell to 4.2 trillion per dollar, institutional workers, clerks, accountants, bureaucrats became worthless faster than the paper they worked on. But the tradespeople who maintained the physical world operated in a parallel barter economy. A plumber in Berlin wasn't paid in marks. He was paid in coal, sausage, bread, and firewood. His skills bypassed the dying currency and plugged directly into the economy of real goods. In Cuba's special period, 1993, after the Soviet collapse, the island lost 80% of its oil imports. The formal economy froze, but mechanics who could fabricate parts from scrap metal became more valuable to the state than university-trained economists. The lesson: repair skills are anti-fragile. Most skills are correlated with prosperity. They thrive when times are good. Repair skills invert. The worse things get, the more brokenness accumulates, and the more desperate the world becomes for someone who can fix it. You aren't riding the economic cycle, you are counter-cycling it. According to BLS data through 2024, this isn't just history. HVAC technicians, electricians, and solar installers are projected to grow by 8% to 48% over the next decade. These aren't just growth industries, they are resilience industries. They cannot be outsourced, they cannot be fully automated, and they cannot be replaced by a digital algorithm. The pipe is either fixed or it's leaking. This skill isn't in any textbook, yet it's older than the textbooks themselves. Buenos Aires, October 2011. On the corner of Florida and Laval, men whisper one word: cambio. They are called arbolitos, little trees, because they stand still on the sidewalk all day, waiting for customers. These are Argentina's black market currency traders. They buy US dollars at the unofficial rate and sell them at a premium. The spread between the official rate and the blue dollar rate sometimes exceeded 60%. These men often had no formal education, but they possessed a lethal financial skill, the ability to read the price differential between two parallel worlds in real time. Every economic collapse creates a monetary duality. There is the official system, dying, state-enforced and visible, and the real system, informal, adaptive and parallel. The gap between them is where fortunes are made. The person who understands the exchange rate between a collapsing currency and whatever has replaced it as a store of value holds a form of power that hyperinflation cannot touch. I call this monetary translation. The historical data on this is staggering. In Weimar Germany, the biggest winners weren't just foreigners buying cheap assets. They were local currency brokers who understood the mechanics between the mark and the hard currencies replacing it. The central bank couldn't stop them because stopping them meant stopping commerce itself. In Lebanon 2019-2023, the pound crashed from 1,500 to 89,000 per dollar. The banking system became a graveyard for life savings. But the sarif operators, informal exchange brokers, became the capillaries of the economy when the arteries had hardened. When a currency fails, it's not just the money that's breaking, it's the signal. Prices in the dying currency become noise, but humans still need to coordinate. They need a translator to bridge the gap between the dying signal and the emerging one. As Ray Dalio notes in his study of the changing world order, the final stage of currency decline is always a period of fragmentation. Those who can navigate that fragmentation capture the most value. Moscow suburbs, summer 1992. The Soviet Union has been dead for 8 months. Inflation is at 2,600%. Pensions are vapor. And yet 71% of Russian households have a dacha, a small plot of land, and they know exactly how to use it. By 1992, these tiny plots were producing 92% of Russia's potatoes and nearly 80% of its vegetables. Households representing just 3% of arable land were producing over half of the country's food supply. Russia avoided a mass famine after the collapse of a superpower almost entirely because of the preservation of household agricultural knowledge. You cannot confiscate agricultural knowledge. You cannot inflate away the ability to grow food. You cannot freeze a bank account that contains fermentation and preservation skills. But here is the distinction history makes clear. It wasn't the ownership of the land that saved people. It was the knowledge. Urban professionals who bought dachas as status symbols in the 80s but never learned to farm were just as helpless as their neighbors. The soil was there, but the code, knowing when to plant, how to manage pests without chemicals, and how to store root vegetables through a Russian winter, was missing. Today, our global food system is dangerously complex. 75% of our calories come from just 12 plants. The knowledge of local food production, which was universal 2 generations ago, is now vanishingly rare. It is quietly becoming the most undervalued form of human capital on Earth. Havana, Cuba, 1993. You are a surgeon with 20 years of experience. You have the highest credential in the most respected field. But the special period has exposed a brutal truth. Your credential is only as good as the hospital it's attached to. The hospital has no anesthesia, no antibiotics, and no power. The institutional machinery that turns your brain into healing has collapsed. Furthermore, the state has banned doctors from private practice. Your degree is no longer an asset, it's a legal cage. 10,000 Cuban doctors made the same calculation. They went to drive taxis. This is the paradox of institutional dependency. The more infrastructure your skill requires, courts for a lawyer, exchanges for a broker, hospitals for a surgeon, the more vulnerable you are to systemic failure. When the institutions fail, the professional realizes they don't have a skill, they have a dependency. The exception: medical knowledge, not the credential. The doctors who survived with their dignity intact were those who could practice barefoot, setting bones, treating infections with basic antiseptics, and managing health without a billion-dollar supply chain. In his book Adapt, Tim Harford notes that the systems most likely to survive shocks are modular. They can decouple from the whole and keep functioning. Your credential is the opposite of modular. It is a derivative of the system. A skill that addresses a fundamental human need directly is the underlying asset. Today, the threat is twofold. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei suggests AI could eliminate 60% of white-collar tasks within years. The credentialed class faces technological displacement in stable times and institutional collapse in unstable times. The most resilient portfolio of human capital isn't the one that makes the most money today. It's the one that retains value across the widest range of systemic conditions. History has been trying to tell us this for 2,000 years. Institutions fail, credentials evaporate. But the ability to fix what is broken, to translate value between systems, to grow food and to heal without a bureaucracy, these are the skills that never needed the institutions to begin with. Don't just be recession-proof, be institution-proof. If this opened a new perspective for you, subscribe. We perform economic autopsies here so you don't become the next case study.